Welcome to one of my favourite places in the UK. This is the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust Slimbridge, which was established in 1946 by Sir Peter Scott, son of Robert Falcon Scott, the Antarctic explorer. Slimbridge describes itself as the birthplace of modern conservation, and that's not something with which I can argue. It's extremely important and has played a very interesting role in the preservation of numerous species both in the UK and abroad. I'll talk about Peter Scott more in a future video because he was an extremely interesting and accomplished man, and his artwork alone is astonishing, but surely his biggest contribution to the world is the formation of the WWT and the Slimbridge Wetlands Centre. It is a really important part of conservation history. Now, I personally come here to test my autofocus settings, which sounds somewhat cynical by comparison to the illustrious history of the place, but it is quite well configured for photography in certain parts of it. I do find that a lot of reserves in the UK tend to be set up for bird watchers rather than bird photographers, but Slimbridge gives something of a compromise in that there are many hides that are good for bird watchers, but there are a select few and a few places around the park itself that are fantastic for bird photography. I particularly like this area near the visitor centre where there are two main ponds. They actually feed the birds in this area, and that means that you get a constant stream of birds flying to and from this area. There are a bunch of places you can go and stand and get really consistent numbers of birds flying in, although I would probably recommend wearing a hat or a hood because they will be flying directly overhead. Now, the history of Slimbridge is quite interesting because it was used in the 19th century to capture and kill ducks for dining at the local stately home. This is an odd history, I suppose, for a place of conservation and protection of birds. But in 1946, Sir Peter Scott took what existed already, the duck decoys used for capturing the ducks, and instead began to use them for conservation. So still capturing the ducks, but rather than killing them, ringing them and using it to track their populations. And seemingly every time I come into this hut there is a different bird nest here. Last time I was here there was a swallow nest. This time there is a very sneaky pigeon hidden up above one of the lights, which I'm sure is nice and warm in the evenings. One of the things that I personally really like about the WWT reserves that I've been to is that the staff themselves are so obviously keen to watch and to study the birds themselves, and I find that a really good indicator to the intention behind the place. Now, Slimbridge Wetlands Centre itself has expanded quite dramatically over the years, and it's quite difficult to actually see all of it in one day and spend time photographing there. So there are certainly parts of it that I would recommend more than others. I will probably make separate videos about each little part. But one of the important places that you should go just for the history of it is to go and see the duck decoys themselves. And this can be approached from a couple of different ways, but there's a nice wooden walkway over some of the ponds. And at the end of it is the Decoy Hide. And from here you can actually see two of the decoys themselves. There are 4 total, and they're arranged in a fairly interesting configuration. They do demonstrations here quite regularly, and that is itself very interesting because you can learn about how these are actually used. There is, however, not much of a photographic opportunity here, as this is a glass windowed hide, but the history itself is extremely interesting, and I think this is one of the best parts to actually learn about it, as well as it having a number of nice black and white photographs of the use of these duck decoys by Sir Peter Scott himself. So Slimbridge Reserve itself is built on the Severn Estuary, and the Severn Estuary is a very interesting place. Geographically, it is a tidal river, and it's got an extremely strong tidal bore. When the sea comes in, it pushes the water back up the river, so it's pushing salt water up the river and into that environment, and it changes the environment quite a lot. So on this walkway, which is called the Summer Walkway, as it is only open in the summer. This is alongside the salt marshes of Slimbridge Wetlands, and this is a floodplain built to absorb the bore and protect the low-lying pasture lands on the other side. So there is a dike here, and on the other side of the dike is a large expanse of salt marsh. I highly recommend doing the walk down the Summer Walkway to the shepherd's hut at the other end and further down to the estuary itself. I don't necessarily recommend doing it without a drink on a day as hot as this. It is quite a hot walk. There's no shade really for the entire trek, though it is only about a 5 to 10 minute walk down this walkway. About halfway down the walkway is a very interesting piece of architecture. This is a pillbox. It was a World War II fortification used as a sort of a lookout post / defensive structure used in case there was an invasion by sea, and it was assumed at the time that there would be, if there was ever an invasion of the UK, that coming up the Severn was a strong possibility. There's a lot of fortifications around this area, and I will visit those in the future. Sir Peter Scott saw the use of this pillbox in 1946 after the war had ended as a perfect lookout point, and it was his first bird hide on the site of Slimbridge. And that's it for my brief introduction to the Slimbridge Wetlands Centre. This is a favourite place of mine and somewhere I visit quite regularly, and I'll be back here to film other videos in the future, and because of that I figured it was worth recording an introduction of sorts to what it is and what they do there. Currently there's a very interesting collaboration between the WWT and Quentin Blake, the illustrator that you may know from the Roald Dahl books. He has produced a number of artworks and a lot of merchandise in collaboration with the WWT, to whom the proceeds go to help further their work. And it's just one additional aspect to the excellent gift shop here at Slimbridge, which feels like a strange thing to say, but I mean, look at these t-shirts. I just have to have one. So yes, thank you very much for watching. I'll be back with some photography content very soon. Until next time.